Greetings, you happily miserable accursed. It's Herle here with Leichnitz, Reid, and Teneycke. Packed agenda today, so we're going surnames only and getting right to it. The Liberal leadership race, Carney's in, Freeland's in, Gould is in. We'll look at the positions they've staked out, how their launches went, what the reaction's going to be, some initial attack lines from the opposition. Our cursed clipping comes from Rick Bell at the Calgary Sun. Premier Danielle Smith ramping up the rhetoric, donning the jersey for Team Alberta. Then we'll head back east to Ontario and Doug Ford, where an election call seems very imminent, doesn't it? We might have someone here on the panel who could talk about this. What are the implications of it? And finally, it's the immortal Mr. Pinsent with our Hey Yous. Scott, Jordan, Kory? Two things. One of which is it's odd we are recording this episode and the inauguration is like right after. So everything could change. It's like recording this episode, and a meteor is going to hit the Earth at 11 o'clock in the morning, and
such good time.
You have to carry on and just talk about politics or something.
Right.
But it's
what will us dinosaurs eat next year?
What replaces mammals?
Just going to go great.
Exactly. And there's something else going on today, which is, by the way, the NCAA College Football National Championship in the States. Tonight, it's Notre Dame versus Ohio State. I'm wearing my Notre Dame hoodie because, they're Catholics. And what the fuck do I give a shit about Ohio State? So,
Catholics.
Yeah. Always cheer for the Catholics.
Sure.
They were
the
playing
papacy chooses the winner of NCAA football. That's the way it ought to work. David, you omitted another important fact about today, and I know that it strikes deep within you. This is the sad third anniversary of Meatloaf's passing. And I remember the day he passed, we talked extensively here on the pod about it. You're deeply struck. On the way to school today, my 11-year-old and I listened end to end to Bat Out of Hell. And I wanted to have a moment of silence, do you think? A moment of sandwich? What would the appropriate celebration of life be?
The man was enormous. But Mr. Loaf, I hate to tell you, Mr. Loaf had one decent ballad, one novelty song, and everything else was completely unlistenable.
That's completely incorrect. That is
completely unlistenable. Jim Steinman should be cast out of civilized society.
I think there should be a statue to Jim Steinman in every center that has more than 50,000 people. I think he's that important to the world.
Well, if we want to mark important musical anniversaries, it was Dolly Parton's birthday over the weekend. So I think that is probably far more worthy of our time.
No fucking kidding. Mm-hmm. No fucking kidding. Dolly Parton versus Mr. Loaf. All right. Let's do it. All the Liberal leadership candidates have launched since our last Curse of Politics out of Saskatoon, Saskatchewan. That day that we did it was Carney's launch. Then yesterday was Freeland's launch and Gould's launch. Jordan, what did you see?
Yeah, mixed bag, I think. I actually sat through the full video of Freeland's launch, so I'll accept my Medal of Honor in the mail for the extensive period that I won't get back out of my life. I guess maybe I'll talk about her first. So she obviously, I think her launch, her video was certainly better than the actual launch event. And we can maybe talk about the concerns and the logistics around like how you do security, how you manage those types of things at events. Anyway, suffice to say, disruptions made it very difficult for her to get through her launch. But once she sort of got into the speech portion of the event, I don't really think it was all that much better. What we saw on display was all of the pacing and communications acumen that we've come to expect from Freeland, and not a whole lot more. I think what I will say for her is that in her remarks, I think I certainly saw her take the fight to Poilievre more than Carney did, more clearly, harder, a little bit more articulately. And I think, obviously her strength there too is that she was able to launch with a strong number of caucus endorsements. I thought thought her Q&A was interesting as well. Certainly her version of the fight with the prime minister, we got a little bit more meat on the bones from her perspective there, framing it much more around the coming conflict with Trump in a way that's obviously sort of pretty flattering to her current campaign. But overall, I think it was pretty mixed for her. Carney, I thought, had the highest expectations going into that launch for sure out of anybody. Because somewhat ironically, coming off of the Jon Stewart interview, that really shot his skill set up in people's estimation. And so I think this was a different format, right? And political speeches are a skill. It is a skill that he is clearly still mastering. I thought lots has been said about sort of the technical aspects, but the pacing was just brutal in his speech. It was slow. He was a bit awkward. I think it was good to see that he had the capacity to joke and have a little bit of that happening throughout. So it wasn't nerves. It was really just sort of like technical skill. His Q&A was much better, I thought, than his speech. But I think actually, if I were a Liberal listening to Carney, the thing that I would be concerned about the most, as he is still, in my mind, the frontrunner here, is the central thesis of his campaign is basically, look to me, I know how markets work. The people we're running against are populists who don't get it. They don't understand how markets work. And I think that what his campaign is doing and where he's positioning himself right now is wedging the Liberals right back into defending the exact institutions that people think are failing them. I do not think that is favorable terrain for the Liberals right now. He will for sure be the smartest person in that room, but I don't think anybody is voting on that. I also thought maybe just a couple other things to round it out. So he still, he talked, of course, a lot about the economy, but again, it was still the capital E economy. It was still looking at it from the perspective of an international financial expert, of a banker, not at the household level. So again, there's still like a weakness in his ability to connect on that level. And man, I also still felt, I know they structured it all around this, like we're coming back to where he played hockey as a kid and they wove the hockey metaphors through the speech. But I still had to wonder, has this guy fucking ever struggled a day in his life? I did not learn a lot about his personal story other than, he grew up, he had a nice, he had this sort of quintessentially Canadian upbringing in some places that were not Toronto. And then he went away and saved a couple economies and everything was great. And then and now he's here. He's back. So I think but
it's the third period, and we're down by 2 goals. And oh my God, Foster Hewitt has gone on a smoke break. Hockey, it wasn't woven through the speech. It was slathered. It was like peanut butter and Jiffy just all over it.
A little
you didn't
heavy
write
on the
speech.
empty rhetorical calories there for me. So I was not a fan of that. I feel like I didn't, even though I was curious to know more about his personal narrative and why this man would like to be prime minister, I did not come away with a lot on that. And I'll spare, I guess, a few words for Gould. Look, I thought
the NDP of this race.
That's right. I'm going to say some nice things because Lord knows no one else is. So look, she positioned herself anti-establishment, grassroots. Somebody's got to do it. I also thought her launch had the most energy out of any of them. And her French was better than either Freeland's or Carney's. And I actually think it was pretty clever of her to play that up. Still a long shot, but hat tip on those things. I think she knows clearly where her niche in the race is and is going for that. So that's what I saw.
Awesome. Thank you. Kory, what about you?
Well, I'm not going to disagree with much of what Jordan said. Carney, I think, would do well to throw away the speech and just talk. He's smart enough to carry a conversation and to hit some bullet points, but it's always better to do it that way if you actually have the game to do it. But the scripted speech just brought out the worst elements of his delivery. And I say that because the Q&A was better. Like, he clearly wasn't struggling to find things to say or to inject some humor, or, so my advice is toss the speech, toss the prompter, work on what your sound bites are, and tighten that stuff up. But the idea of these set speeches is maybe, gives handlers some reassurance that you're going to say what they want you to say and hit those marks. But if it's at the cost of that delivery versus the other delivery, I don't think it's a good trade-off. I would stick with notes. I don't know what to say about Freeland. Like, I'll say a bit more in my hey you, but
now I'm looking forward to that.
But you're going to have some problems if every event that you go to is interrupted every 20 seconds. And I thought her way of dealing with that, you could tell she hadn't done any stand-up comedy in her past, other than the fact that in addition to the fact that she's humorless, talking about how if, people are booing, like, are you booing the Boys and Girls Club? Can't we all agree that we like the Boys and Girls Club? No, dummy. They're booing you. They're not booing the Boys and Girls Club. Like, if that's your best pivot that you can come up with, man, go back to the lab and work on a better one. I just thought it was bad. It was bad from start to finish. Actually, the best part was probably your daughter's introduction. Maybe she should be running. She can communicate better. And Gould, I'm not gonna grace it with a comment, because, like, I think it's so irrelevant. What are you doing in the race?
Yeah. That's somebody that didn't listen to my Hey You.
Yeah.
Another Herle confession. I've spent decades personally nurturing a duopoly. Lemon Heart rum and Coke. A cocktail duopoly. It just works for me, man. I'm easing into this with a joke, because monopolies and duopolies do not work for most consumers. What they do is hinder genuine competition in markets and business sectors. Precisely what I've been talking about on behalf of our presenting sponsor, TELUS. TELUS has been barred, by way of a federal cabinet order, from offering wholesale wireline internet services to new customers in Ontario and Quebec. If you've been following the story, you'll recall that prior to the cabinet order slamming on the brakes, an interim decision by the CRTC had allowed TELUS wholesale access in those markets, so TELUS went in and invested. They offered highly competitive prices and new service bundles. And the people came. It's here that I'll take you back to the beginning, to the unhealthy, uncompetitive duopoly. The data from that period shows the vast majority of customers TELUS signed up came from the two behemoths in the region, Bell and Rogers. They were not drawing customers away from smaller carriers, i.e. putting the little guys out of business. Just the opposite. TELUS was adding competition to Rogers and Bell's internet duopoly in Ontario and Quebec. That, my friends, is what effective market forces in action look like. A duopoly diminished, real choice, consumer benefits in the form of lower prices and better products. But again, the federal cabinet order has put a halt to all of that. TELUS is fighting it in court. You can make your voice heard too. If you support policy that disrupts the duopoly and fosters genuine competition, please add your name to the nearly 200,000 Canadians who have signed TELUS's petition at demandmoreinternetchoice.ca. So, Scott, my understanding of the speech with Carney is that the teleprompter broke in the first sentence, which doesn't surprise me given the otherwise, frankly, surprisingly amateurish production values of that launch.
Agreed. So that would probably be my first point I would make, is that I thought the contrasting launches of Carney and Freeland highlighted some common unfavorable challenges. I thought that both suffered on a staging and execution basis. In Carney's launch, I found myself unhappily surprised at how unprofessional I thought it was. Like, I mean, basic stuff that doesn't relate, even before we get to the candidate, doesn't relate to the candidate. So, for example, you get to choose where the fucking media risers are. You know what you don't do? You don't set it up so that the shot of the candidate coming in is him looking like he's 4 apples tall, and all we see of him is his bald spot. You don't have him introduced on a sloppy, ill-defined backdrop with a woman whose opening remark is that she's never met him, but just read about him on the internet. Not ideal. The logo, whatever. Like, it's an own goal.
That woman's sense of history was a little off too, because Lawrence Decore may have been a wonderful man, and we had mutual friends in common, although I didn't know him. But he never governed Alberta.
No, that was a bit of a miss. But you know what? I'm going to go easy on her. So there were things like just
Alberta was never red, as she said. There was a time when Alberta was red. No, that's not true.
So here's what I expect:
red with the blood of liberals, maybe, but not red.
Seeing red.
But I expected, and I think to a degree, I have a right to demand of Mark Carney a cut above. And I thought that his campaign would be a cut above. And I did not think the execution of that event was a cut above. Quite the opposite. If I was a candidate, I'd have steam coming out of my ears going, listen, I'm new to this, but you fuckers are not supposed to be. So clean this up. This is ridiculous. It literally looked like a riding nomination event, and it was too sloppy, too loose. And then Mark's speech, like, I hear what you're saying about the teleprompter, and I do think, maybe more so than Jordan, that he felt nerves. And you know what? You're going to feel nerves, because as we've all pointed out, he hasn't done the retail political thing. So this is the first and biggest moment of that kind of performance for him. So he's going to feel nerves. One of the ways that you overcome nerves is rehearsing and getting yourself into muscle memory as much as possible. And so that's why the teleprompter should not have been an issue. And that's why even if the teleprompter started, blasting the lyrics to Pour Some Sugar on Me, he should have been able to hit his applause lines, and he should not have plowed through them like a blind driver. And so I expect he's got to lift that material. He's got to show more energy. He's got to know that when he hits the end of what is supposed to be a desired clip, that he brings some power to that, and it demands that the room cheer. You don't have to stop, look around, and basically say, hey, everybody, you're supposed to applaud now. So there was a bunch of stuff about execution. I generally liked his positioning. I want to come back to that. So then I see all that, and then exact same thing, well, not the exact same thing, then a different version of it with Freeland, whose event I thought, until she got up to the microphone, looked a lot tighter, a lot more composed, a lot more professional looking. The daughter we're not giving her enough credit. The daughter was dynamite and a wonderful bit of politics, right? Because the daughter spoke emotionally, powerfully. She's invulnerable to criticism. Obviously, you can't go at the daughter for talking about her mom, and she was spellbinding.
Watch Polyev. I'm sure there's a way.
And then, yeah, no kidding. She's just like Justin. Freeland's daughter's just like Justin. So and then she gets on stage, and then you get the disruption. So obviously, go back to the professionalism of the effort. Why in hell was there not security? Why were these people permitted to get that close to the stage? Why couldn't they have dealt with it better? And why, as Kory pointed out, did she not have, after this long time in politics, a notion of how to better manage the crowd? Because she slipped straight into, and then her remarks slipped straight into that condescending grade 11 geography teacher tone that drives people up the fucking wall. And so we talked last week about, well, how come we haven't heard from her? And one of our speculations was because she's better in print, she's better on video, she's better in concept than she is in execution. And that was brought home in spades to me with that event. And this whole, now, the one thing I will say that's good about her event as compared to Mark's, or the one thing that's interesting about her candidacy as compared to Mark's, is that she's got a bullseye. And I don't think the strategy will work, but her strategy is, I'm a wartime leader, and that's because we're going into a trade war. And it's crystal clear what the bargain is. You vote for me, you're going to get somebody who's going to put the boots to Trump. And by the way, I'm the best qualified person to do that. You can then have a debate and dispute about that, but she's made it very clear what her offering is. I think I changed the slogan, right? By the way, Trump doesn't like me. Now it's your turn.
Yeah,
You know, like I don't think that's a good slogan, but
her plan, Scott, is to annoy him to death.
Right.
Like just by continuing to talk. Like it's
the last thing I would say though, that Carney is it's not sharp enough. The takeaway isn't crisp enough. I want to know what's the essential bargain. Is it that you're going to focus on the economy? Is it that you're an outsider and you represent disruptive change to the Liberal Party and therefore Canada? Is it that you are going to be able to, so I don't think, as tough as it is, and you've said this before, David, he has so many more things to do than other candidates. He has to introduce his bio, which I think was the overwhelming effort on the launch, makes some sense, but he's got to pack a bunch of other stuff in there. And I think one of the victims of it, in addition to a poorly executed speech, is that the essence of his candidacy, the unstated bargain that's at the core of every sales job for a candidate, which is that if you vote for me, you get this. You might get a bunch of other things. You might get a bunch of things you don't know, but you for fucking sure get this. This is the bargain. This is my pledge to you. That's got to be crystallized and really, really, really strongly communicated by him. And I don't think that was there. I still think he'll win because he's in a better position to win. And even a poor performance by him is better than what we witnessed from Freeland.
Just on the Freeland speech, one thing that really caught my attention, that speech was crafted with wedges at Kearney.
Yep.
And one of the wedges at Kearney was this. In 2013, I had a big job too, internationally. But the Liberal Party was on its knees, and I thought Harper was bad. And I came back. I quit my big job. And I came back to Canada and I ran in a by-election for the third place Liberal Party. And I helped build the Liberal Party up to the point where it formed government. And then I helped the Liberal Party govern. And I'm going to run again in the next election, whether I win or lose this leadership. I'm the Liberal in this race. Right? What do you think about that?
Well, and expanded it too, as well to I will run in the next election, irrespective of the outcome of this leadership race, and all the other candidates should declare whether they will or not.
Yeah.
And I don't think we'll see that kind of declaration, or we'll see it like in the way that we saw with Michael Ignatieff. Oh, I'm not just visiting; I'll stay here. I'm not going back to Harvard until like 15 seconds after he lost, and then he went back. I think it's a good wedge for her. I don't think all that wedging amounts to a terribly compelling argument, though, because I think her delivery is just so bad. I think it's just so bad that to hear more of this person is going to make you like her less. Like, at least Kearney has some charm. I think she has whatever the mirror opposite of charm is. She has a grating voice and a grating personality, and the more that you see of her, I think the more you don't want to see more of her. I do wonder what your guys' thoughts are on Jordan's point, because I thought it was a good one about his backstory. Like, he needs to humanize himself. He needs to be relatable in more ways than just, hey, I grew up here. And like, is his backstory that boring? You guys know him better than I do, that there's nothing there that he could bring out to the fore to make him a bit more relatable, a bit more human. Like, to Jordan's point, have you ever experienced adversity? How'd you overcome it? Like, what's the emotional connection point that makes you relatable in terms of that backstory? Because Poilievre has it. Paulie has it in spades. Like, he has got a well-developed backstory and narrative that I think is quite humanizing and compelling. And I think that, that's a heavy lift for every politician. I think
seems like they grew up in the same socioeconomic bracket, Kory.
Yeah,
Poilievre and Kearney.
But why not more emphasis around that? Like, where's the touching story that's relatable? I just don't think he connected on that level in the same way that Poilievre has been able to, and I think he needs to, because he's so easily boxed into this corporate banker stereotype, which is at its core very dehumanizing. And so you got to pull the humanity out of that backstory and put it in the window.
And I would add, the fastest way to do that is with an emotional connection with your voters. Like, you have to have something that pulls people to you, that creates that, like, that's the shorthand for that connection.
It's not hockey. Like, hockey is a way of putting it over there. Hey, you like hockey. I like hockey. We all like hockey. So therefore I'm a regular guy. Well, you know what? Not really. Not really the storyline that I think makes you relatable. Yeah,
And he
you
needs
watch
that
pro
shorthand.
sports.
He needs that shorthand more than Freeland does because he's less well known. So he has to occupy that space to define his own story.
Well,
very
Freeland
interesting.
largely did it with her kids, right?
Yeah.
Like that is a way to humanize and to make you appear like a more complete person. Like I think she checked that box a lot more thoroughly, but did it through a surrogate. So maybe there's an avenue there that he could do. Like, what would his wife have to say about him if she were to have a personal interview around what Mark Carney's like? I don't know, but like I felt like there was a void there, and he didn't really fill it.
Well, I think you put your finger on it. And this is almost a generic rule. This is almost a rule of thumb, I think, that I approach almost all campaigns with and all candidates with, which is that it is important, particularly if you're not well known, to establish a sense of who you are and get the bio out. But as a matter of practice, I think the candidate is almost the worst person to do that, because when you share stories with it, either feels unless you're an extraordinary communicator, it feels contrived and forced, or it feels clumsy and exploitative even. So I think you put your finger on it when you said that the box was checked on Sunday by Freeland's daughter. To me, if I was advising Carney, I would say you need to get that story out there, have others tell it. So the idea about, I'd like to hear from his wife, like, what was your first date? When did you meet him? I want to hear something that's like...
Yeah, because, isn't the log cabin background a little cliche?
That's what I think. So I think it's more like something.
It also doesn't tell you
rooting.
anything about why he's doing what he's doing, right? Like, we're really going to motivation here. Why do you want, like, what is animating you in your past to seek the office you're seeking right now?
Take things off your own plate. So, Mark, you focus on what the bargain is, what Canadians get if they vote for you, how you're going to represent and present change, and how that's better for people. Let others, and it's important to do, tell us who you are and what makes you tick. And it has to be something that's a little bit more organic than, as you say, we're in the third period. I played hockey. I put skates on right in this very building on that bench over there. That stuff's too, it's too 1993 as a political tactic. It's too stale.
It's just generic.
It's not personal. It's not personal. It's maybe biographical in some way, but it certainly doesn't create any emotional connection. It doesn't tell you some deeper truth about him. Oh, you put on skates. Great. I guess we're all the same around here.
It was better than Gould,
skates.
Whose video, in my view, was written. Some purple prose assassin thinks that they are an unbelievable copywriter, and they strung together a list of embarrassing cliches between beaver tails and poutine and maple syrup, and Jesus Christ, it felt like the worst
Three things that nobody in Western Canada Three things that nobody in Western Canada knows anything about: beaver tails, poutine, and maple leaves. Right? Yet in Ontario, they're iconic to Canada. So fucking Ontario. Anyway.
Bad writing.
Okay. I want to talk some more about the war on trade we are told will hit just about every sector of the Canadian economy starting this week. Now, I know facts are not fashionable anymore. People who don't like them just yell fake news and go back to listening to what they want to hear. But I'm afraid facts remain facts. Here are a few about the automotive industry. As I said last week, our sponsor, CN, moves about half the vehicles sold in Canada and a lot of the ones sold in the US too. CN has evolved along with the supply chains that have grown up over the past 6 decades between Canada and the States. American automakers operate plants in Canada to take advantage of wages here, the exchange rate, social benefits for workers, and skilled Canadian labor. They do it because it's profitable. So when you hear talk about not needing Canadian cars, well, let me stop right there. There's no such thing. Most cars are manufactured on both sides of the border, crossing and recrossing multiple times before final assembly. Anyway, talk of ceasing production in Canada and bringing it all back to the States is utterly mystifying. Companies would have to shut down plants here, fire entire workforces, abandon integrated supply chains, build new plants in America, and deal with retaliatory responses from Canadian governments. Foreign automakers would happily jump into the breach. And guess what? The cost of a vehicle would spike immediately, enormously, on both sides of the border. Yes, both sides of the border. As someone once said, you're entitled to your own opinions, but not your own facts. CN stands for smooth, unshackled, free, fair trade, and will continue to. Next week, lumber and energy. This is all so baffling. Okay, let's move on, but I wanted to say, I should have said this off the top, a disclaimer. A listener of ours, I think it was Colin Horgan, quite rightly pointed out that people should know where I stand on the leadership given the commentary here week in and week out. And so here's where I stand. I think Mark Carney's the best choice. I hope Mark Carney wins. I'm not involved in his campaign, and I'm not working on the campaign, but I'm hopeful of its success. That's my point of view going forward.
Yeah, and I noticed he tagged me in the same comment. So I'll make this, it's almost a ditto for me. On balance, I think that Mark, I'm not involved in any way, and I'm trying to remain completely out of it so I can do media commentary. But if you're asking me what my bias is that I hope Mark will be better because I think that he represents a greater chance to, I think change is the name of the game, and he's a better prospect for renewal. Can I say one last thing just to cap off the leadership launches? I think, I sound very, very critical and run through all the inadequacies and all that kind of stuff. They're both obviously extraordinarily talented and capable people. And I'm not just saying that to mail it in. But here's the big thing from my perspective. I think there's room for improvement based on what we saw for both. I think that he also has greater upside in terms of improvement. I think we've watched Freeland for 10 years and we were reminded again in the heat of that launch. And I was starting to wonder, maybe we'll see a different page from her book, because I do think the video is sharp. And I do think her campaign has a strategy, and it's apparent and it's compelling. I don't know if it will work, but it's there at least. But then her performance issues are eternal. And to me, that smacks of a candidate who is unwilling to confront them and therefore unwilling to overcome them. I'm hopeful that he will say, I kind of pulled a boner and I'm willing to get better, and I'm going to try getting better.
But wait, let's one thing about getting better, you guys. Which is, it feels to me obvious watching him that he's never going to turn into a Joey Smallwood, Davey Stewart type of campaign political orator. And maybe he can get better, but I don't know what getting better means. Does getting better mean getting better at delivering a traditional political speech? Or he seems to have a more, when he's talking himself, a more plain-spoken, less rhetorically flush way of speaking. Can that be turned into something effective?
Yeah, it's definitely B. Like, I think that there's a degree to which, as a political leader, you'll always need to be able to deliver a scripted speech. But in this media environment, I would argue that's a way less salient skill than the second thing that you're talking about. And for him, because his timelines are so compressed, both in terms of winning the Liberal leadership race, but also introducing himself to Canadians. Like, he's got to do double duty as he's in this period, if we all take him as the front runner that I think he is. So for him, if jettisoning the script is a way to get to a better performance, and all the evidence suggests that, which is not a lot of evidence that we have before us, but what we have suggests he does a lot better. He was much stronger in the Q&A. He was much stronger with Jon Stewart. Then they should be doing that. Like, this guy is going to have struggles, for example, I think, translating into, is he going to win TikTok? I don't know. But he's going to have a much better chance of translating into those mediums without a script, playing on some of those strengths that we saw in terms of being friendly, having a bit of a sense of humor. Understanding those things are going to get him a lot further in media environments that simply count a lot more in this campaign.
What? You guys are going to shake your head. I disagree. And here's why I disagree. Obviously, he is more effective in certain venues and in certain manners than others. But one, the underlying problem is that it isn't crystal clear what the takeaway is, as I've said already. I think that he has to crack that code, and then it will show up in his Q&A, it will show up in his conversations, and it will show up at the podium. Second, I don't think it's ever a good idea to say, well, you know what, speeches are hard. Every single politician likes to do town halls. They like to do Q&A. They find it easier. It's easier to drive on the side of the road, but sometimes you have to learn how to put your car on the highway. And I think that it's a necessary thing. don't take the shortcut and say, well, I'm not going to learn how to deliver a clip line. Learn how to deliver a clip line. Learn how to do that. It's important. And so I'm not saying that that's the venue to put him in constantly, but I'm saying it is something that he has to overcome. And just saying, well, then I'll stop doing the thing that I find hard is not the fucking way to succeed.
Well, I do disagree with that. I think, look, you have to have a certain level of competence in a bunch of different areas. But that doesn't necessarily translate into success. Like, I think you've got to present yourself certainly more clearly in terms of what the choice is. Like, I agree with that part of what you're saying, like sharpen up what the ballot question is. But a ballot question delivered in a selfie video in a way that communicates in today's media environment will take you further than the best rally speech ever delivered, because it just doesn't communicate the same in that online environment that's so important. So, like, if he can do the less scripted, but also bring to it, some differentiation and some sharpness on a ballot choice, I think it'd be better to do that. I think it's better. I think it's in today's media environment, the more important skill set. So, I would worry less about, practicing rally speeches, and I'd worry more about sharpening the message and delivering it in whatever format is the most useful for you. You could apply that same argument to Freeland, though. She can do a slick video and she has trouble communicating and all of that. And it takes, 23 takes and 4 hours editing. Do 23 takes and take 4 hours to edit it. Totally, but stop putting out the kind of garbage that we saw on her launch, because, like, let's be frank, it's garbage.
Well, I'm definitely with Scott on the content.
Scott usually takes your rebuttals better than this, Kory.
He's just gone.
He's just fucked off and left. He just...
Well, I'll talk about him until he's back. Look, yeah, I'm with Scott on content.
I prefer to talk for him if I could.
You're not sad enough, Kory. Yeah, look, I think he has. There's some major, I think, challenges baked into the core message of his campaign, and I think that there's a need to go back and think about whether that is the most viable path. But in terms of delivery, look, I would agree with Scott if it was 2 years until a general election. He could go and make all kinds of scripted rally speeches and go to the, whatever, do Canada 2020, do all that shit. He does not have that time. He is going to have lots and lots of time to deliver scripted speeches when he's the leader of the third party in the House of Commons. So I think that his campaign would be way better served to focus on an area of strength. And one thing I think that you hit on earlier. Let's be clear,
that's behind the Bloc Québécois, right?
Dream on.
Probably.
But look, like, one thing that's really true is he definitely has more capacity for growth, I think, than we would expect from Freeland, because she has had that ice time, to extend the metaphor. She has been out there. So what we're seeing right now is the culmination, really, of a decade, more than a decade, in a political space. This is probably about as good as it's going to get in terms of her performance there. He is more of an unknown. He still has capacity to grow. So I think, if I were a Liberal member, I would be looking to see what kind of growth we're going to see over the very short period of the leadership campaign, and hope that that's enough to carry through.
But this is a problem with experience. Sometimes if it's reinforcing bad habits, which is what I feel like you've gotten with Freeland, she's developed some deeply rooted bad habits around communications. And sometimes that's harder to root out than teaching somebody afresh.
Yeah, I also do want to say,
Don Newman
I think
once said something to me about Lauren Nystrom. He said, he doesn't have 20 years experience. He has 1 year's experience 20 times in a row. All right, yeah. I'm going to move on to our clipping. From Rick Bell in the Calgary Sun. And I think this is important, because I think this is a perspective that people outside of the prairies are not picking up, but exists. So here's an excerpt from the column by Rick Bell. On Friday, the Alberta Premier exhumes former Prime Minister Pierre Trudeau's National Energy Program, the reviled NEP. For those outside Alberta, the NEP, though it was decades ago, is a symbol of how the folks down east screwed Alberta royally. Smith outlines all the wreckage of the NEP, or as she puts it, the last time a Trudeau slapped an export tax on Alberta energy. Jobs gone, homes lost, bankruptcies through the roof, people leaving the province, a multi-year recession. Ugliness brought about at the hands of our own country. His dad, quote, His dad crushed the lives of thousands in our province. We won't let his son do it to our people again. Never, says Smith. Pierre Trudeau, Justin Trudeau, father and son. Strong stuff. The stuff you still hear around coffee shops in Alberta. Aside from Team Anderson from Team Smith, he's her chief of staff, I think, gets into the ring in this tag team main event. We will not sacrifice the livelihoods and futures of tens of thousands of Albertans to another Trudeau's attack on our province in order to appease Eastern elites and politicians losing their collective minds over our refusal to sell out our own people. Not going to happen. Kory.
Well, it might happen. I hope it doesn't. In the sense that the sentiment that Rick Bell's talking about is in Alberta in spades, and I think it carries over into Saskatchewan and in Western Canada, generally speaking. But that said, things like export tariffs are not up to or export taxes aren't up to the provincial government. They're up to the federal government. And, in the same way that, how did we end up with a national energy program despite fierce opposition from Peter Lougheed? Is because it's not decided by Alberta, ultimately. I don't know. The dinger, as he's lovingly referred to in the Sun Media universe, is it was pretty good bellwether, pun intended, for Western Canadian sentiment. And I imagine if you ran a poll right now, Danielle Smith's probably surging in popularity there. What I worry about is that the history and the natural fault lines that exist there are a division that could really hamper our ability to respond to the U.S. And we'll see what that response needs to look like. Like, we don't know whether we're dealing with day one tariffs. We don't know whether we're dealing with something that's graduated. We don't know whether it's going to be, as was suggested, I think in the Wall Street Journal today, like a more accelerated CUSMA negotiation. But we know this: there are going to be big challenges on trade coming to us from the Trump administration. And I think it's true that pain is going to be across the board. And the more Canada can respond with a unified approach that includes all premiers and where everybody is sharing in the pain and is seen to be sharing in the pain, I think the more it can be a unifying factor. But if it looks like Ontario is fucking the West and Quebec is fucking the West, and that they are disproportionately paying for this, I think it'll rip the country in half. But likewise, I think if everyone in the rest of the country is paying a price and Alberta or Saskatchewan are sitting on the sidelines, I think that's equally bad for national unity. And I think, and so finding a way to bring everybody together and to share in the burden of a response, and hopefully, in doing that, you don't have to respond as much. It's better to threaten things you don't do than actually do things. Because let's be clear, all of these things that we're talking about doing in terms of countermeasures
are incredibly damaging.
They're damaging to us too. This is economic chemotherapy. Like, you're going to get very sick before you get healthier if you're having to employ these tools. So my hope is we don't have to do any of it. I don't think that hope is realistic. But, I would rather have, a consensus and everything possible being threatened and then doing as little as possible, in reality. I think that is the best case outcome. Whether we'll have that best case outcome or not remains to be seen. But I think the fault lines on this are really bad. And I think this is where, I think it was Scott, you that said, or, all of us, I think, agreed, the Prime Minister would be well advised to step back from this. He would be well advised to have Dom LeBlanc and Doug Ford and other people lead that negotiation between provinces, because I think he is such a lightning rod around that table. I think he is so lacking in mandate to make decisions and take these moves that he's getting in the way of unity, not promoting unity. And be a strong enough leader to recognize that your leadership is part of the problem. And if you're not going to have an election, which they're not, because they're mid leadership race, step back and let others who are more capable of doing that work do it for the sake of the country.
So I'm interested in the focus on Trudeau in her and Anderson's remarks, particularly hers, frankly. And it makes me wonder how much of this is substance and how much of this is personality or persona. For example, not to put too fine a point on it, would she consider that Pierre Poilievre, who will have won all the seats in Alberta, would he have the moral authority to bring Alberta into export taxes on oil and gas products?
Well, I think he'd probably, eat glass and wash it down with poison and have to make that choice. But because it's so divisive within the Conservative coalition to do that, I think you have to come up with a plan that everybody is putting something in and try to find a way where it is as equitable as possible. But, that particular mechanism is never going to go over well in Alberta. And I don't know whether it's a sellable idea even for Poilievre. But, if it's Alberta is excluded from paying and participation in this, and Ontario and Quebec are doing stuff and BC is doing stuff, well, that's going to prove to be a big electoral challenge for you in those markets. And as we talked about on last week's show, there are a lot more seats in Ontario, and the margins are a lot smaller. So I think you got to keep your eye on that ball too. So I think it's a huge challenge for the country. I think it's a huge challenge for the Liberal Party. I think it's a huge challenge for the Conservative Party federally. So if it were easy, we wouldn't be talking about it right now. But it's very difficult for everyone.
Scott, are you getting concerned about Canada's ability to withstand Trump's economic attack on us, or whether or not it's going to really expose the fissures of national unity?
Yeah, sure I am. And this is the first time that we've had to dance with this challenge in our history. We've seen external challenges provoke East-West confrontation in the past. And the reflex is to say, well, back in the day, we had leaders who were able to look past short-term political and partisan gain and think about the national interest. But I'm not sure that's as true as we think that it is. And I think it's always a question of managing it. I'll start maybe by surprising you and saying that I understand exactly where Rick Bell is coming from. I mean, articulated in a certain way and thought about from a certain perspective. You're like, so hang on. The first up to the plate is going to have to be us in Alberta. We're going to be the ones who will have to disproportionately suffer. We're the ones who will have to sacrifice our jobs, our industry, our growth, so that politicians elected from Ontario and Quebec can lecture to the country as a whole what it means to form a common front and sacrifice collectively. And so I can see that argument very much. But my rebuttal to it, I guess, is, look, what's really going on here is that Danielle Smith is waving a flag of surrender. Teddy Roosevelt's old piece of advice, walk softly and carry a big stick. Well, she's running loudly toward Trump and throwing the stick down. Like, I believe that there is a move that is required and an obligation from the rest of the country, particularly the federal government, has to lead in this respect. And that is to say, we're going to keep you whole. We're going to do everything we can to keep you whole. We know that energy and resources are going to be the stick we have to draw out of this bag, the punch we threaten to throw, or maybe are forced to throw in order to bring this fight to an earlier close. And therefore, we will help producers and the people in these oil producing and energy producing provinces. We're going to help you along. We're going to spend billions, maybe tens of billions, depending on how long this lasts, in order to try to help you, to support you. And yes, that's going to kick off some tensions, and people are going to say, what about us? And what about this industry and that industry and this part of the country and that part of the country? And we as a federal government will tolerate and take some of that heat, because we see that you are the ones who hold the biggest stick that we as a nation can swing, and we're going to try to help you not carry that load on your own. So I think there's an obligation there. But when Danielle Smith lays down the stick. She surrenders our ability to bring this fight to a close and to an earlier close. And that doesn't just harm all us sons of bitches in Ontario and Quebec. It hurts the country as a whole. And I just think we cannot go into a fight and preemptively surrender our ability to swing the biggest punch that we pack, the one that will truly hurt Trump. And let's be crystal clear, going down there with Kevin O'Leary and trying to kiss his orange ass isn't going to get us anywhere. Pain is the only thing that he will respond to. Political pressure that hurts him and bubbles up first to senators and governors and then to the White House. That is what will make him change his mind. And we can't do that without putting resources on the table. It's just a cold, hard fact, I think.
Jordan, you want to jump in here?
Yeah, well, I mean, just to heartily echo, I think what both Kory and Scott were saying. And look, I think the reality is, like, Alberta is not first up on the response. That's actually the goal. The goal is to make sure that anything that would touch the oil and gas industry would actually be the last resort in any sort of an escalating tariff fight with the Americans. But what's so dangerous about Smith's approach is that she's actually making failure in that fight more likely. And I think, like, I would have a lot more understanding about a political strategy that just smashes every Western alienation button on the dashboard for her if it didn't have the knock-on effect of dramatically weakening the entire national response. And for that, I think it's toxic for all the reasons that Scott and Kory have spoken about. It will harm our ability to actually spread the load across the country, to have an effective response that elicits enough pain to stop the whole thing with Trump. Because I agree with Scott, that is what is going to do this in the end. It is political pain that stops it for Trump. And our lever for that has to include the capacity to actually touch things where there is the biggest political damage for him. And so that's oil and gas. And look, I think what's so fascinating about this politically is that you're now seeing more distance within the Conservative coalition on this. So between Ford and Smith than you are between the left and the right and between premiers who are, New Democrats and Conservatives across the country. It is absolutely shredding, I think, the Conservative coalition in a lot of ways. And I am so interested to see what this is going to do for Pierre Poilievre, because he is in a really challenging spot here. There is a clear, responsible answer for somebody who is likely going to be prime minister in 6 months' time. And instead, what we got last week is a non-answer. He will not engage in the question of how he would deal with tariffs and oil and gas. And I think that in this, I think Smith risks pulling Poilievre down with her. And I don't think the judgment on that is going to be kind at the end of the day, because if we're going to have any hope of fighting this absolute behemoth that's coming for us today, it is going to have to be together. And it is going to be about spreading the pain out. And it is going to suck for everybody. And those are going to be some really difficult decisions that have to be made. But that is also part of the job of being prime minister. So I am hopeful that such as is possible where the mainstream media makes contact with Pierre Poilievre these days, rare though that is, that they will continue to drive that question home, because I think that one really matters for the country.
Hey, Kory, where's that sun coming from that's in your eyes?
It is coming like bouncing off the snow on my patio and right in my eyes.
You need sunglasses.
No, it's the latest PC numbers in Ontario.
I'm squinting like I don't know what. Look, I think there's some ways for Smith to play a really helpful hand for herself in this, and a way for the federal government and other provinces to help present a position that she might be able to say yes to. And I think it touches on a bunch of the things that you guys have already mentioned. One, we don't want to do these things, they're last resort. But, if we do have to do something in this space that, the opposite of what the National Energy Program was going to do, Alberta will be compensated at market value for its resources. That, any money extracted from a province's resource sector by the federal government through this process will go to that province to direct as they see fit. So you're going to get the same amount of money for your oil, and the revenues from whatever, export tax or something, if it's brought in as a last resort, will go back to you to to use in a way that you see fit. And the last and maybe the most important is to try to make something good happen out of this crisis. And that is to get a commitment from other provinces, and maybe even an agreement from other provinces around pipelines, and from the federal government around getting the fuck out of provincial jurisdiction in terms of resource development, and try to play a positive role as opposed to the Stephen Guilbeault, let me get up in your grill and try to prevent things from happening role. Maybe it's getting away from the hard emissions cap, which has been such a problem. But if Alberta coming out of this could get more pipelines to Tidewater, that would be good long term in terms of a buttress against Trump going after us. It would be good for Alberta and the resource sector. All of these critical minerals that we talk about that the US wants and doesn't have and that we have, we only notionally have. Like, they're in the ground. And the resources in the ground are not leverage. Resources that have been mined and refined are leverage. And so what is our plan to actually get the Ring of Fire built in a timely way? What's our plan to mine more lithium and all the other rare earth metals that are out there that they need? What is our plan to do that? And let's get some agreement around that, because right now, I think, from Alberta, in fairness, all they've gotten is fucked by this federal government. Nothing in the way of helping them actually do any of those things, in my view. I guess they did one pipeline, but reluctantly, very reluctantly, and done a lot of things that I think everyone in Alberta would view as very unhelpful.
And acres of subsidies for oil and gas companies into the sector. I also wish one thing that would emerge, and I do think this is something that's different.
Would more pipelines be bad, though, Scott?
No, that's not my answer. My answer is that, let's not accept uncontested the idea that the federal government does nothing other than shove a pole up the ass of everyone in an oil-producing company. That's just not the fucking fact. I also think, there is something to be said, and I was, cautioning against false nostalgia, but it does feel like one thing I'd love to see, and maybe this is something of a reflection of the weakness of the federal government and Trudeau right now personally, but I think it is, there's been something of an arc over the last 25 years. It'd be nice if the national idea had some prominence. Not, when all the first ministers get together, they're not peers. One of these people is the prime minister of the country. And there is a national imperative. And there is that idea of a national voice, as combative as it sometimes was when Pierre Trudeau talked about it. I mean, that sense that no, we'll just devolve every single, let's go back to the British North America Act and make certain that we treat this thing as though they're very tight compartments, they're very nice and neat, and there is no sense of nation. There's just the accumulation of a bunch of different provinces with different interests. Like, the national idea gets diminished and forgotten, and you have Quebec acting like it's an autonomous jurisdiction, and you have Alberta acting like it's autonomous jurisdiction, and you have leaders who think their job is to shrug their shoulders at the idea of the national idea, and I find that a disturbing and dispiriting trend.
Well, at least until a moment of national crisis, right? And here we are. And I mean, I would make the case that it has almost never been easier to politically triangulate on an issue than the one that we see before us right now. You literally just need to believe in the continued existence of your country as a viable economic entity on the international stage. And there is only one politician right now in the country that's not meeting the test, and it's Danielle Smith. And I think that is going to be just damning in the long run. And what she's doing is going to harm Albertans. It's going to harm our ability to fight these tariffs. And I don't think there should be political space for it.
All right. Listen, that was a robust discussion, and thank you for it. However, it's almost completely eliminated our Ontario election discussion. And leaves
good.
Me, I saw you
Kory will see
talking the
himself
clock out.
No wonder.
I saw you talking the clock out. But wait, don't do it anymore.
I was able to lower the blinds, by the way, so I'm squinting less. Should we talk about that?
I have one question about the Ontario election that I want us to cover, which is, if it happens, Premier Ford will say that these are extraordinary circumstances and that Trump's trade threat represents a brand new, unprecedented circumstance, and it will require extraordinary responses, both fiscally and politically, from the Ontario government, and he needs a mandate to deal with that. If that frame holds on the election, he will win. Scott, what are the chances that that frame holds?
Probably fairly strong because it's so difficult.
That's a long pause.
Well,
Jordan, pick it up.
I'll pick up.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's this is another example of how Trump is about to scramble our politics, right? So I think in any ordinary circumstance, it would be a difficult frame to hold. I think there would be a lot of room for the NDP and Liberals to say that this is a cynical move to distract from the fact that Ontarians are not better off after 7 years of Ford. But when Ford is going to be able to construct a campaign not against them, but against Trump, then there's every opportunity, I think, for him to take that ground. So it's going to be a challenging fight to shift that for the opposition. And I think that it's really probably the very best gift wrapping around an early election call that Kory and his team could ever hope to have. So I have no doubt that they will take it.
Kory, how do you calculate the risk in the circumstance you're in? How do you calculate the risk of you start off with an election campaign that you think is about this and you want to be about this, and then 2 weeks in you find out it's actually about healthcare?
Well, that's always a risk whenever you go into a campaign. I think the challenges of Trump are not going to be short-lived. And we'll see later today or tomorrow exactly what the initial salvo is. But I'm gonna bet no matter what the initial salvo is, and like we've heard all kinds of different rumors as to what that might look like, but it's going to be a promise, I think, from him to continue to put pressure on us on a bunch of fronts, and I think it's going to continue for the life of his presidency. And I would say not only for Ontario, but I would say for the federal government too. You want to have as strong a mandate as you can get. And a mandate that will go past his presidency in order to respond to this, because you're going to not only be, negotiating with the Trump administration, you're going to be negotiating with the federal government, and you're going to be negotiating with other provinces around this. And the stronger hand that you have in whatever your political jurisdiction is to conduct those negotiations, the better it is going to be for you, because there are going to be tough choices that are going to have to be made. There's going to be, as we just talked about, some pain that's going to have to be shared. You're probably going to have to do some things that are not popular for your home audience. And if you're, staring down the barrel of an imminent election, it's very difficult to make those choices, and you might make different choices that are maybe not as good. So I think it's a good narrative because it's true. Or, I always love the Henry Kissinger line, has the added benefit of being true. And I think in this particular case, it does have that added benefit of being true. Certainly, Ford is doing well in the polls. I disagree that he blews on other issues. Healthcare is always challenging for conservatives, so a healthcare election is probably not a good one for them. But that's irrespective of how healthcare is doing. In the same way, an education election would be bad for conservatives for the same reason. But I think we're going to be talking about the economy. And an economy election is almost always good for conservatives. And, we're still dealing with like a zombie apocalypse in almost every urban center in this country. And I think a crime election is a good election for conservatives. So I think the issue set is leaning in that direction. I guess we'll see what happens. But, the Trump challenge is real, and the need to respond to it in force is also real.
I hear all that. I just have some spidey sense, and I feel it about the federal election too, that it could be such a strong elite consensus that this is all about geopolitics. But on the ground, is it still not going to be about the price of lettuce?
Well, it
in the
is.
grocery
Like,
store.
I think it has the potential to be, but who in that election campaign are you going to vote for? Are you going to vote for somebody who, likes tolls and taxes and has raised taxes a bunch of times as a mayor, or the NDP who love all that kind of stuff too? Or are you going to, are you
I'm
going
not
to
saying
go for
you're
the guy
poorly
who's
positioned on all the other issues, Kory. I'm just saying this particular issue, which we think the federal election will now be about, and which we think the provincial election may well be about. I'm just not 100% sure that citizens are going to agree that's what it's about.
May or may not, right? And it depends a bit on what we see today or tomorrow. Like if it's not immediate tariffs, which it might not be, right? We don't know. Like
that's
Trump,
the rumor du jour this morning.
Well, it's a rumor du jour this morning, but you have a guy in the White House who has a proven track record of jumping all over the map on issues and saying things and then not doing them, or doing things that he said he wouldn't do. Like it's to say that it's unpredictable environment dealing with Trump is an understatement. So that threat is going to be there. If it's 25% tariffs across the board, no ifs, ands, or buts, the election's going to be about that, because it's such a huge hammer. If it's something that's a much milder version of that, maybe it won't be, because you're not going to be dealing with broad job losses across the economy immediately. But you might be in that situation 6 months from now. Like time will tell. Like as we say, we're doing this hours before we're probably going to have an answer to that question. But there's a range of options, and the ones that create more economic damage and dislocation up here make it more likely the election's going to be about that. And the ones that do that less will make it more likely to be about the issue set that we had, a few months ago, which is largely around affordability and housing.
Scott, what were you saying when you got cut off by your bad internet service? I know that if the federal cabinet would allow you to do it, you would switch to TELUS internet.
Yeah, exactly. But
I think he would be
goddamn gatekeepers.
He'd be going with Starlink. He's a big.
It's okay,
man.
Scott. You can join our internet co-op.
I think exactly. That's
It
great.
comes with a side of granola.
We'll grow our own beets, and we'll run the internet with
You'd be welcome in the
bamboo
commune.
bicycle. I think a couple things. One, I believe more than one thing is true. It is true that this is obviously the transfixing question of our day. It is also true that Doug Ford has been shopping for a reason to go to the polls earlier, because it's in Doug Ford's interest to go to the polls early. And this is the latest reason that's been sort of fitted into that narrative. And so I do think there's a risk, as there always is, that the first 8 days of the election campaign could be dominated with a big, healthy dose of cynicism as reporters and as voters go, yeah, but you're doing this not because you want to protect us. You're doing this because you want to protect your government. This is not about what's best for me. It's about what's best for you. So that's thing number one. Thing number two is my son just spent 5 days in a hospital, and he only spent 2 days in a hospital bed because he got moved to the hallway. Hallway medicine.
It's not possible. I'm sorry, that's not possible, because in the 2018 campaign, Doug Ford promised that he would end hallway medicine.
Well, I was astonished
it's like waiting room medicine now. You're lucky. It's a lineup for the hallway.
And my son was in a hospital in Etobicoke, no less. So I just think that, plus a combination of family doctors, I think that gut level, I think it has the potential to sneak up on the government. Now, there's lots of resources and opportunity for the government to manage this, because it has a ton of advantages and a ton of cushion. And it's going to be really hard for the opposition leaders to penetrate a news cycle that's going to be jam-packed every minute with Donald Trump, with the federal prime minister, with leadership candidates federally, with Danielle Smith. Like, it's hard to bust through. It's harder now than it ever has been.
That's too much politics. Some of that will not bust through.
Right.
That is too much politics for the public to consume.
I think it's a big challenge, by the way, for the leadership candidates. I think they may go unheard. our friend Mark Carney here, as we all been chatting, he's been doing little town halls since his campaign launch. I have heard sweet fuck all about any of them. So I just think that's a big problem for both opposition leaders in Ontario. But I do think that the government is a little more vulnerable than Kory permits in his list of possibilities. And I do think you're going to be facing a stiff prosecution on why and what motivates you and why it's in the public interest right out of the blocks of the election. And I think telling people go fuck your hat is obviously really important. Donald Trump might not be the right answer.
Yeah, I agree with Scott on that. And I think like everything, often in politics, it turns on the why you're doing it, right? And so this is where Ford does have a vulnerability that voters already believe that he makes decisions from time to time for his interests of his friends and insiders and things like that. And if that filter is layered on top of this decision, then there is a pathway for the NDP, maybe for the Liberal, to go in and go on some of those issues where they are far more vulnerable, not just healthcare, also housing, all of those things. I think that there's space for them to get in on it. So it is by no means an ironclad promise.
The healthcare question, just remind me, who's heading up the primary care?
That is the lamest argument. I know you think that is an arrow that sways over. Tell my mom in Belleville, Ontario, who hasn't had a family doctor for 10 years, that Jane Philpott is on the case and she's a Liberal. And my mom will say, I still don't have a family doctor.
Kory, like the visuals of hundreds of people lining up in a fucking snowstorm to get a family doctor that came out this week are brutal. They are absolutely the kind of thing that will crystallize.
Did they want a doctor or a glass of drinking water that wouldn't kill them? It was Walkerton, for Christ's sake.
It was awful.
Yeah. All right, let's do our Hey Yous.
Ladies and gentlemen, please return to your seats. The Hey Yous are about to begin.
Let's wrap it up. Jordan, start us off.
I got a Hey You. So we have talked since the beginning of time, it feels like, about the virtues of paid negative advertising against Poilievre if there's to be any hope of putting a chink in that man's 40-plus armor. So I have a Hey You today going out to some people who are doing that. So this is about the Protecting Canada campaign. Folks may have seen this. They've been out digitally. And they are basically putting out some paid advertising. It's a big spend. It's about $4 million. They're going on broadcast TV, and they're making the case. They're looking at voting record, ties to the far right, the whole shebang, the whole smorgasbord of potential anti-Poilievre arguments. And I think it's actually really smart timing because, as we talked about a bit today, we're in a moment right now where our politics is moving, like we're with Trump, with Trudeau resigning. There is an opportunity, I think, to shake up some of the stagnation that we've seen in the numbers federally. We know that opinions about Poilievre, while they may be generally good, they're not yet locked in. There's still space to define him in the minds of voters. And I think it's so important. We've seen a lot of campaigns on the right really successfully precondition voters in the pre-RIP period. So I'm talking about Canada Proud. I'm talking about Ontario Proud. They've done that work really, really well. And so this is that kind of work coming from the opposite side. And I just want to give them a shout out because I think that there's a real opportunity to start to peel off some of the last in folks to Poilievre's vote coalition. So women, some of the older voters, some of the people where the support is a little bit softer. And that it's really key to have this type of paid media to actually get into a space where you can expose and make clear the stakes of the risk of a Poilievre government for Canadians. You can start the exercise of disqualifying him and hopefully denying the guy a majority. And I think that is God's work. So thank you to these folks.
Well, no kidding, because, I mean, it is definitely one of my ironclad conditions of re-electing a government in this circumstance is that the alternative has to be unacceptable. So, you have to change your leader, and the Liberals are doing one of those components. But Poilievre still has to be unacceptable for that new leader to win this election. So that's a job that still has to go. Scott, you got a Hey You?
My Hey You is to the Prime Minister and those around him. Please do. I know you're only there for another 6 weeks, but you're doing stuff, and it has consequences. Do some research. Do some focus groups, and specifically about this issue and around this issue of wedging Poilievre off of Alberta and Danielle Smith. Prime Minister came out great guns on this issue the other day. So instantly I'm asking myself, does he do this because he feels like this is his gift to the leadership candidates? He'll put this battle into the field. He'll take the slings and arrows, but he gets the argument surfaced, and then that benefits the candidates. Or does he, by virtue of picking up this argument, contaminate it with his overwhelming unpopularity and the polarizing effect that anything said by him has, and makes it impossible for the leadership candidates to utilize? I have a view that it is the latter, not the former. It should be a settled question. You should do some qualitative research. You should show the Prime Minister making these arguments and watch what people say and how they react to it. Do not go by gut. Do not continue this overwhelming bias you have against research and say, we'll just do what we want and trust that it works. Not a lot has been working. And I really think you're maybe robbing your own party and whoever succeeds you as Prime Minister of an important argument. I think you're contaminating. I think you're denaturing an important argument. And it's really could be very much a gift to Poilievre, because he gets to sit and whistle as he walks past the graveyard while Trudeau takes that weapon away from those who might wage war against him in the future.
Research, man. They've been staggering around like a blind man for years now. Why would they
Remember
change?
when they
No
loved
research.
being data-driven, guys?
Data,
Well,
my balls.
Was a moment, huh?
Well, not just
Nuts.
that, but like the decision to go on this harsh partisan attack on Poilievre around Smith is, I think contaminating it as you suggested, but it is also making it a hell of a lot more difficult to get unity amongst the premiers at a really critical time. Like I think it.
You don't think it's a nation-building exercise?
Yeah, not really. Yeah, unhelpful.
All right, brother. You got AU?
I do, and mine is, I guess, most pointedly to Freeland, but I think to any candidate who is, particularly incumbents, because you're more likely to be protested, you got to take security seriously. Like if you're going to do a larger event, and let's be honest, like when you look at the crowd at the Freeland thing, it wasn't that large a room. Like to have a dozen people who are protesters is showing you're not putting a modicum of effort into the work of screening folks before they come in. Maybe they, intellectually feel like that's a bad thing to do or something, but it is a reality of politics that you have to take security somewhat seriously. And that's not what the RCMP are there for. Like people probably don't realize that. Your protective detail is there if somebody rushes the stage and becomes a physical threat to the leader. They're not there to remove protesters. They don't do that. You have to have your own security people there to provide that function. And clearly they didn't have any. And it's deeply problematic if you're having comms people or campaign volunteers doing that work. They're not professionals. They might do it in a way that is too little, or they might do it in a way that's too much. But all of that is just, risk and gets in the way of communicating, and it shows a lack of professionalism in your campaign. So take security seriously, folks. It's a real thing.
Yeah.
Kory, can I just ask a quick question? Do you have a chrome tiger behind you?
It's a mirrored like panther, but
Okay.
it goes by the name Disco Kitty.
Totally
and it's
normal.
not mine. It's Nicole's. Like let's just state the obvious.
Sure.
Right.
Yeah.
You got a keen eye there, Scott. Nice. My hey you goes out to Saskatchewan NDP leader Carla Beck. The four of us were in Saskatoon
Here.
last week to do a live Curse of Politics event. She was at the same event. She hooked up with Jordan, obviously, and the next thing we knew, she was joining us for dinner, and what a delight that was. Fun person, interesting person. I don't think she's unlocked the key to PA, Moose Jaw, or North Battleford yet, but she's working on it. And anyway, Carla, it was really great hanging out with you, and thanks for spending that time, and made us all better understand the dynamics of Saskatchewan. So thank you for doing that, Carla Beck. You're a great sport. And that's our show for this week. So thank the three of you for being here. This was good. And big days ahead. And we'll see how that goes. Anyway, we'll be back next Monday to talk about it. Thank you, our presenting sponsor, TELUS. Thank you, CN Rail. Thank you to all of the accursed out there. so loyal, listening every week. Appreciate it very much. And boy, we met a surprising number of you at that farm show in Saskatchewan.
Yeah.
So
That's great.
we're a hit in the combines. Know that. All right. See you next week. Take care of yourselves.
Yeah, that's good.